When I am feeling particularly uninspired or frustrated with the state of the world around me, I escape into the world of online journals and blogs. My favorites, unsurprisingly, are those written by strong women and by fellow clergy. One such blog, written by a pair of Episcopal priests who happen to meet both my preferences quite well, spoke about the human tendency to take refuge in stupidity. And while the title made me laugh out loud, it gave voice to a striking reality about the way that each of us, at one time or another, seeks to escape or hide from those people or things that challenge us. And we are in good company. For today we have the story of Elijah, who has run off to the wilderness seeking refuge from his mistakes and misdeeds. And we have the story of God, who was present there, drawing near to Elijah even as he did everything he could to escape the world around him. Now, Elijah is a prophet whose name we have heard before, but his story is not one that all of us could necessarily tell from beginning to end. At this point in Elijah's life, the prophet has just completed a contest with the prophets of Baal, the followers of a so-called deity other than the one true God. In an effort to prove whose God is for real, a contest had been held to determine which prophets were authentic. Both sides built a sacrificial altar, but when the prophets of Baal prayed to their God to light a fire on the altar, nothing happened. Now when Elijah prayed to God, fire came down from heaven and his altar was bright with fire, despite the fact that Elijah had just drenched it with water. It showed everyone that God was indeed God. And then, in an overzealous moment of triumph, Elijah led the prophets of Baal down by the riverside, drew his sword, and slew them all. Of course, not everyone was too happy about Elijah's triumphal celebration, and so, terrified and running for his life, Elijah took off into the wilderness. And it is there that Elijah calls on God and prays that God might take his life. Does this seem odd to anyone else? That Elijah would flee to a remote place in order to escape those who wished to kill him, and then offer up a prayer for God to take his life? But you see, Elijah took off, and he was not simply running from danger, but from the world. He was worn down and tired of trying. And while the remoteness of the wilderness afforded him safe shelter from those who sought his life, Elijah remained imprisoned and trapped by his own fear and exhaustion. It seems a bit of a letdown that a man as great as Elijah should give up so easily. Yet how often do we do the same? When doors are slammed shut around us, when things do not go as planned, when the very reality of a world filled with hatred and bigotry and violence that seems to be getting worse makes us throw our hands up in desperation, how tempting it is to retreat, to simply draw into ourselves and lock ourselves away from the world. Yet however we try, wherever we flee, God still draws near. Elijah, mentally and physically exhausted, prayed for God to take his life. But instead, God provided nourishment and care, calling Elijah to travel to Horeb, because God does hear our prayers. But sometimes God is wise enough not to meet our requests. The Episcopal bloggers called it refuge in stupidity. They wrote, refuge, that place we go to escape or hide, to get away from the things that challenge us. We take refuge from the storms of life and from people who hurt us. And if we are entirely honest with ourselves, we humans also take refuge from the better things of life, from kindness and friendship and love, anything that challenges us out of our comfort zones, out of the walls we built and the moats we dug to stay in our own little corner of the world where we are in control, where we make the rules, where we can have exactly what we want, with no concern for the other. What are you doing here? God asks Elijah from the cave at Horeb. The prophet replies with a long list of deeds, a rather self-serving, self-righteous list of accomplishments, actually. But surely God knows all that Elijah has achieved. God is not asking for an autobiography, but calling Elijah out of his misery by pointing toward all that has yet to be experienced and lived. The prophet, however, misses the point. And so God calls him out onto the mountain where he can meet God face to face. It's not a face-to-face meeting as we might expect. It begins with a display of power and majesty, a mountain-splitting wind, an earthquake, a fire, and then silence. Sheer silence. Various older translations have called it a still small voice. Though a far less accurate rendering of the Hebrew, there is a beauty to the picture that this phrase paints of the ways in which God spoke to Elijah on the mountain that day. And yet, for all the beauty of the image, I'm not sure this is really about God in silence. Now, the point, perhaps, is not to instill in us a reverence for quiet, but rather awestruck wonder that God calls us at all, defying expectation, overturning logic, entering our lives and stunning us into stillness as we open our hearts to the divine. God called Elijah out of depression, and while that is a message of comfort for those of us who are struggling, it's even more a message of promise for each and every one of us. Because God is the kind of God who meets us where we are, who tugs at our hearts the way we need to be tugged, provides us with sustenance we didn't know we desired, and leads us out of our self-imposed refuge of fear or foolishness to go forth and accomplish God's ways. When God calls Elijah to a cave and blasts him with wind and fire, God reminds Elijah who is in control. And then by coming to Elijah in silence, God doesn't lay in all the drama and predictability of anything Elijah might expect. Because tradition up until that point had taught Elijah to expect God in natural disasters and unexplainable weather phenomena, perhaps even a burning bush. But the prophet who called down fire from heaven already knew that God was in such things. This was a man who would run away and struggle to find God in solitude. And so it was in silence that God said, "I'm still here." Our God is a powerful creator, a mighty ruler, an omnipotent Lord. But alongside that power is a God who cares enough to number the hairs on our head. So God is not only revealed in magnificent natural events, not only in silence, but all around us, through the lives and words of those who work and speak on God's behalf, through the very reality that God is eternally present in each of our lives. This presence, this attention to the individual, is what Elijah experienced at Horeb. Following that moment of sheer silence, God asks Elijah a second time, "What are you doing here?" And I'm still not sure that Elijah truly understood the point. He lists his accomplishments once again, naming his good deeds as well as his fearful state. But God is undeterred. It is irrelevant that God is wanted by his enemies. First and foremost, Elijah is wanted by God. "Go out from this place," God tells him, "for I still have work for you to do." And Elijah is sent to anoint kings to lead God's people and to further his work as a prophet. Life has its battles. Obstacles will stand in our way. People and situations will cause us to stumble. Like Elijah, we may be tempted to run away, to take refuge in the familiar or the easy, to hide from the still small voice of God. But wherever we turn we will not be hidden from the presence and the call of God. God will draw near. And again, we are invited to stand at the edge of creation, to engage in becoming something new and unknown. We are called out of our self-formed darkness of doubt and despair by a God who is roaring and rushing into our lives with all the force of fire and earthquakes, shaking us from self-pity and fear with the demand that we seek our purpose, and then sustaining us and nurturing us and speaking to us in the silence where there is nothing, absolutely nothing, to distract us from the reality that God still calls us by name. So come. God has drawn near to our places of refuge. Can you hear it? It's the voice of God calling to you, asking, what are you doing here? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.